You're listening to the Rise Above podcast, the only podcast on the planet with a mission to help you live a free and uncommon life. Here's your host, Greg Smith.
Yes. Welcome. Thank you again for being here today. This is the Rise Above podcast, and you are listening to episode number 2. I'm your host, Greg Smith, and I believe that if you desire uncommon freedom in business and in life, then intentional and consistent action is a must. And so today's episode, I'm going to talk about what you tell other people is ultimately what you tell yourself. And this stems from my very first podcast, which talks about how naturally I am a procrastinator. And what I've had to do over the years to overcome that is essentially how I came up with this concept, along with learning some mindset and subconscious training and things like that. And so, I was talking to my podcast strategist, Jonathan, and we were really coming out with what is going to be my first few episodes and what is my podcast going to be about in general. And I kept coming back and I kept saying, I'm like, well, knowledge by itself really isn't power. What is power is applied knowledge. And I kept saying, you have to execute, and you have to apply, and you have to apply. And you can't just learn, and you can't just study, and you can't just strategize and think. You have to actually apply it. And he asked me, he's like, why do you keep coming back to saying that? And I had to really go in, and I had to really think about it. I had to really digest it. And I remember him asking me that, and I said exactly this. I said, well, what I've learned is ultimately what you tell other people, you tell yourself the most. And you are the person who hears it the most. And so ultimately, if I can teach it, well, guess whose brain that gets ingrained in the most? Mine. Because I can teach 10 different people on 10 different calls of the people that I'm mentoring and helping and the entrepreneurs, and I can teach each person one-on-one. You have to apply your knowledge. Oh, you can watch the training and learn how to do this. That's great, but you have to apply it. Well, out of those 10 times, each one of them heard it once, whereas I heard it 10 times. And this concept goes for all areas of life, really, because, one thing as being an entrepreneur over the last 11 years, I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I've been making money since I was a little kid, with little lemon heads, selling them on the street. But, being a real entrepreneur and actually having a business as an adult, as I've grown into learning about the power of words and what you say and ultimately how what you say out loud is a reflection of what's inside. And out of the mouth, the heart will speak. And so, I learned, and I'm still learning in watching people in their words and really just seeing people say things that really just aren't true. There's people who I might say, hey, what's up, Jim? Or certain people that you see, and you'll get the response. Just living the dream. And for the longest time, I never really had a response to that. I was just like, oh, cool. Yeah, living the dream. And, deep down inside, what I've come to realize is people really don't believe that they're living the dream. However, they're saying that because it's cliche. It's what you do. It's what you say. But it comes back to, what you tell other people, you hear the most. And so people, in my opinion, are convincing themselves a lot of times that they're living the dream. And so I've came up with this just bold response, and I say it. If I know the person well enough, or I'm really just feeling bold that day, and somebody's like, Abe, just living the dream. I say, cool, whose dream? I straight up ask them, I say, whose dream? And I've had people, some of my greatest friends, they say, my dream, brother, and I'm like, that's right, Mark, it is your dream. And I encourage it. But the other people who aren't necessarily on that path of freedom or living the uncommon life and experience that uncommon freedom, typically those people, they'll kind of pause for a second and they'll think about it. And they really don't have a great answer, but you can tell that I got their wheels turning and that they've realized that they aren't really living their dream. They're living a dream. They're living somebody else's dream. And so it's just something I've realized is essentially what you tell other people, you hear the most. And so who's going to believe it? You. You're the one that's going to listen. You're the one that's going to hear it. And you're the one that's going to ultimately start believing that it's the truth. The other side of this, though, and that's really interesting that I've come to know, is what other people tell you, what they tell you you can and cannot do, isn't really what they believe you can and cannot do. So let's say, like me, 11 years ago, you're starting down the route of becoming an entrepreneur. You're taking a leap of faith and you're jumping out with something that you believe is going to work. You have an idea, you have a concept, you've thought about it, and you're going to execute it. And then you tell somebody and they say, Greg, you're just going to be a pizza boy for the rest of your life. Or they say, well, if it were that easy, everybody would do it. Well, that's a scam. Oh, well, what about 401k and benefits? Does it have that? Well, you have to pay taxes on that, right? Well, at the end of the day, what all of those things that somebody is saying, what those things are, is ultimately what their belief is. They're projecting onto you what their belief is. If they say, oh, that's a scam, well, that's what they believe. It's not what you don't have to believe that. And I would highly suggest that you don't. I thank God every day I didn't believe people 11 years ago when people told me that. But it's also the same thing when somebody says, well, if it were that easy, or, whatever it is, what's actually happening, what the words that are coming out of their mouth, what those words are words that are based on their experience in life, on what they've learned, what their perception is. Maybe it's based upon a past experience that they had. Well, that experience isn't your experience. So don't allow it to become your experience or your truth just because somebody else said that it was. I want to encourage you right now to not be offended if somebody ever shoots a dream down of yours. If somebody ever tells you you can't do something. I used to get offended. I used to get fired up. I used to let it drive me to where I would be like, okay, you watch me. And, I got to say, in the beginning, that actually helped. It got me the momentum that I needed to have to become successful. But as I growed and matured in my thinking, I don't allow that to even bother me in the slightest, really at all. Because what I've realized is that that's their belief. That's what they think.
Are you someone who wants to live life on your own terms? Do you dream of having more time to spend doing the things you love? Then download your copy of The Freedom Formula absolutely free at www.riseabovepodcast.com. What are you waiting for? Go to www.riseabovepodcast.com to get your free copy of The Freedom Formula.
And so, why should I let that affect me? And why should you let it affect you? You really shouldn't. The greatest of the greats, the people who accomplish and change the world, don't allow other people's opinions to change the way that they think. I'm not saying not to have some wise counsel and people that you can kind of, ask their opinions and get their feedback, and people that you respect, and people that, frankly, are in a better position in life than you are in whatever the area is that you're asking that help in. I'm not saying you shouldn't have that. You should have that. You need that. I have that. So I'm not going to take broke Uncle Joey saying that's a scam and allow that to affect me when he's in a worse situation than I want to be in, right? And so the moral of the story is this. With today's podcast, I really want you to understand the power of your words, the power of your words. What you tell other people is what you hear the most. And so I want you to dial in this week and really start to listen. Listen to the words that are coming out of your mouth. Ask yourself, are you an uplifter? Are you uplifting? Are you positive? What are your responses when somebody has a dream? How do you respond when somebody comes to you with an idea? Are you open-minded to really listening to it and seeing how you can support that person along their goals? Are you positive? Are you speaking life? Start thinking about that this week with people, and also start looking at those automated responses that people tend to have that are cliche, like, "Oh, I'm living the dream." Well, don't live somebody else's dream, and don't say it if you really don't mean it. If you're not living your dream, then don't respond that way. Start to monitor what you say. Start to monitor what you say. And I promise, if you change the words that are coming out of your mouth, and if you speak life to other people, and if you encourage other people, then what ultimately happens is you are encouraging and you are speaking life into yourself. You are speaking life into yourself. You're also sowing some very good seeds into the world, into the universe, and into other people's lives. And so as you go through this week and you're talking to other people and they're bringing stuff up to you or you're responding, start to think about what are some things that you might say that really are just things that you tell yourself that aren't true, but they're automated responses. And one of those is that you're living the dream. And maybe you are, and I hope that you are. And if you're not, then you need to head over to the riseabovepodcast.com and download what I got for you over there. That's really why I'm doing this podcast. I want to help people break these chains, and I want to help people live this uncommon life of freedom that I've gotten to experience, and I've been able to help hundreds of other entrepreneurs and people experience themselves too. And a lot of that starts with what you tell other people is ultimately what you tell yourself. What you tell other people is ultimately what you tell yourself. And so are you telling other people that they can do something? If somebody comes to you and they have some type of idea or some type of what you see as an unrealistic goal, do you tell them that it's unrealistic or that they can't accomplish it? Or do you ask good questions and do you encourage them? My Aunt Kathy, many, many years ago, was one of the few that encouraged me to do what I'm doing today. And that's changing lives and that's helping people. And it was her words that uplifted me and spoke life into me. And now, as I look back and I've journaled and I've thought about this for years, because she has since passed. And I think about the words that she said to me, and it makes me realize why she had such a great life. It really does. So protect the words that are coming out of your mouth. And maybe if you're like me and you have some natural procrastination sitting inside of you, festering, and you're trying to push that out, you may come up with speaking more about doing things now. Doing things now, like why wait? Don't wait. Even today's episode, I wanted to wait until tomorrow. Why? Don't really know, because I wanted to be a procrastinator. But instead, I said, do it now. Do it now. Hey, why don't you just do it now? That's something that I ask a lot of people, along with talking about how knowledge is nothing without application. The other thing that I might do or say, depending on the situation, is like, hey, why don't you just do it now? I had somebody actually over the last 24 hours, I was coaching them up and getting them started and walking them through this business venture that they have. And I'm like, hey, why don't you just do that now? Like what holds you back from doing that now? And they're like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do it. I was like, awesome. But I could tell that they had natural procrastination in them, just like me. And so part of my mantra, just as a side note, is literally I have created this affirmation that I have a do it now mentality. And so I've convinced myself that I have a do it now mentality, and I do it now. And yeah, does procrastination still sneak in? For sure. So anyways, I don't want to go down that route, but I want to get back to summarizing essentially what we've talked about and tell you about next week's episode. And that is this. Today we talked about the power of words, and we talked about how what you say ultimately is what you are telling other people is what you are telling yourself more than anybody else in the world. So be very careful what you say out of your mouth to other people, because ultimately it's what you believe, or it's what you're going to convince yourself by default that you should believe. And so monitor your words over the next week and really start to apply and make changes and be uplifting, be positive, and speak life, most importantly, into other people. And so, hey, listen, as I'm getting this podcast started, one thing I can tell you I would really love to see is ultimately if you're getting value out of this. And one of the ways that you can do that is by heading over to the riseabovepodcast.com/review. And in there, I have a little document that's essentially going to tell you how to leave me a review, or maybe you already know how to do that. You can head over to iTunes right now and drop me a line. And really what I'm looking for is, cool. If you want to give me 4 or 5 stars, that's awesome. I definitely appreciate that. But really what I'd love to know is what you took out of today's episode. So, if you took something out of this and you're going to apply it and you're going to do it now, I would love to know that. Yeah, I would truly be grateful for that. Now, next week's episode is a doozy. Let me just say that, because the title is Gold Medals Are for Winners. And so you're going to hear me pretty raw and uncut, but I'm really excited because frankly, gold medals are for winners. And so until next week, take care. God bless. Thanks again for listening in.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.